As you guys know, I have read all of the Amazing Spider-Man comic books from AF15 all the way through the current runs, all of the annuals, all of the good stuff, and I'm going to be doing a top 5 best Spider-Man writer or writers and a top 5 worst of all time Spider-Man writer or writers, in my opinion. This is my interpretation of how I felt when I was reading the comics and my experience from literally reading them all within about an 8-month period. So some people may look back and say, wow, that's crazy that you think this person sucks or is great. Look, it's just what I think, but I will tell you, I think it's a pretty solid list. Let's kick it off with number 5 on the best writer list. And we're going to go with, I know this may shock some people based on a video I did previously, but Jerry Conway. I know, Jerry Conway killed Gwen Stacy, and quite frankly, he sucks for that, okay? But you know what? He was barely 19 when he started writing. We'll forgive him. Gwen Stacy was one of my favorite characters early on. Absolutely one of my favorites. She was amazing. She finally became an interesting character, and, well, it kind of hurt my feelings a little bit when Jerry took her away from me. But I will tell you what he did with Green Goblin, his death, and then introducing Harry Osborn as the next Green Goblin, and of course bringing in the Punisher, and a lot of the stories that he did were very interesting. I loved the fight he did with the Hulk, and you know, he wrote from about issue 111 to 149, and he was named successor after Stan Lee, so that's got to count for something. If he just wouldn't have killed Gwen Stacy, I think he would have been, you know, a little bit higher towards the top. Number 4 spot on the best Spider-Man writer, Michael Stzenski, JMS. I know that's going to be very divisive for a lot of people. You know, One More Day, Brand New Day, Sins Past. Those were some pretty rough storylines, but in his defense, a lot of that was from the editorial team and Joe Quesada. You know, just, I'm going to remove that, right? Because he didn't want the Norman and the Gwen Stacy thing, and that wasn't his fault. We're going to put that all on the editorial team. And quite frankly, if we're being candid, a lot of this terrible Spider-Man stuff from history comes from editors thinking that maybe they're a little bit smarter than some of the writers could be or what they wanted to do. But what I will tell you is, there was one of my favorite moments, if not the most favorite moment in all of Spider-Man. It was the Spider-Man versus Kingpin fight where literally Peter Parker goes into prison and beats the dog shit out of Kingpin. It was one of my most memorable scenes in all of the comic books, and I loved it. I also felt like he really brought back the love for Mary Jane and Peter Parker again that honestly had been lost and is still lost to this day, because editorial at Marvel thinks that Peter Parker needs to be relatable, and that means that him and Mary Jane can no longer be married or really progress as a couple, which quite frankly is a massive mistake by Marvel. He also did these Civil War tie-ins and the Spider-Man Civil War arc, and honestly I felt like those were really enjoyable, and I found myself after a lot of the Roger Stern and Dave Michelinie and Todd McFarlane and some of those arcs had finished, you know, Spider-Man become dragging on for me. And I felt once I got to JMS's run, I was a page turner. I was constantly interested. You know, I know he brought some weird things with the totems and stuff like that some people didn't like. I didn't mind it so much, and I found it interesting. It was a different take. Number 3 spot, which I don't think this is going to be a divisive one, but it's Roger Stern, Mr. Hobgoblin himself. Honestly, some of my favorite reading was done during this time. Hobgoblin, Black Cat was interesting. Mary Jane had came back. The big Juggernaut battle I loved. You know, all of those things, Roger Stern, I don't think there was necessarily a bad time. You know, he wrote from, 224 to around 252, so you get the Black Suit in there a little bit during the Secret Wars run. I know there was a couple of issues he didn't write, but overall, for those, 30 issues, give or take. Honestly, I enjoyed the heck out of it, and I think there's a reason why when you talk about great Spider-Man writers, his name and his run are always mentioned in that, in my opinion. So Roger Stern towards the top. I felt like what he did with Hobgoblin, maybe a little bit derivative, but heck, Marvel has not shied away from being derivative of the Green Goblin. So, but I think he did it right. I think he did it very well. Number 2, I think a lot of people are going to be kind of weird about this one. I don't know, but I will tell you this, to me, has to come in a combo package. Dave Michelinie and Todd McFarlane together, the writer and artist, their run on Spider-Man, from like 296 to about 330. I know Todd didn't do the earliest stuff, and I don't think he was on the very tail end of that. I think Eric Larson picked up. It could be a little bit off here or there, but that's not the point. Their specific run was the best Spider-Man I've read since, I don't know, honestly, since Stan Lee and Ditko, just because, that was such a fun time. But I felt like they brought the love for Mary Jane and Peter Parker. Todd McFarlane really changed the game when it came to the way Mary Jane looked and her design and her attitude. And of course, what he did for Spider-Man. There's not been a more influential artist for Spider-Man since he was created, if we're being candid. Between the webs and the dynamic poses of Spider-Man, literally bar none, Todd McFarlane, David Michelinie would be the number one spot if it wasn't for naming Stan Lee and Steve Ditko as the top, the number one. And I put them both there as a combo package because, Stan Lee maybe was the writer, but if you look at the Marvel way, Ditko had just as much influence, if not more, than Stan Lee. And honestly, you have to give that credit. This was, 1 through 38 when Steve Ditko was on it, and then Stan Lee continued up until about issue 100 or so, give or take. I know there was a couple after he did, and some more throughout the time, but you have to give credit to their creation, their villains. It was fun, it was campy, it was enjoyable. You really felt like there was a love there, and I feel like that's kind of what's missing in current Spider-Man, is that love for Peter Parker and his just the villains and things like that. So honestly, you couldn't do a top 5 list and not name these two as the number one writers. Before we jump into the top 5 worst, tell me what you think about my top 5 best writers of all time for Spider-Man. Really would love to know what you think too. So number 5, we're going to kick it off with really a non-controversial pick, Howard Mackie. Tell me one thing that was memorable about his run. He killed Mary Jane, and volume 2, 1 through 30 that he did, 1 through 29, absolutely nothing positive happened. It drug on forever, it felt like, and it was only 30 issues when I was reading it. Look, just not good. Not good at all. Not great, not good. Just was there. But you killed Mary Jane, so that's up for me. I know she comes back. Number 4, I think this is where people are either going to be like, hell yeah, or you guys are just going to turn off the video, but don't do that because we still have 3 more picks after this. Number 4 is a man that I know people are going to say, what do you mean? He wrote Spider-Man for a decade plus. Well, guys, quantity does not mean quality. And I'm talking about Dan Slott, okay? He just hasn't done anything fantastic. He spent over a decade on Spider-Man. There was nothing that was great. The most memorable thing was Superior Spider-Man, which, hell, was nothing to do with Peter Parker. It was more so with Doc Ock as Spider-Man. It was fine. It was okay. But it's, not a great Spider-Man Peter Parker story. I know some people are going to be like, well, what about Edge of Spider-Verse? It was fine, but you spend a decade or plus on Spider-Man, and 95% of it sucked. It was the longest reading of my life. And there may have been 1 or 2, stories, but, heck, if you look at that Disney Plus show where Dan Slott was doing the Iron Man 2020, I'm sure it was like somebody else doing half of the good stuff on Spider-Man for him. So Dan Slott is not a great Spider-Man writer. I think he was just on it because, hell, he was willing to do it maybe. I don't know, but it was not good. And Parker Industries. Good stuff, guys. Number 3. This is a whole slew of people. We're talking about Terry Cavanaugh, Joey Cavalieri, Todd DeZago, J.M. DeMatteis, J.M. We're going to go JMD. I know he did Kraven's Last Hunt, but look, he was a part of the Clone Saga, and it was a whole thing. And Tom DeFalco, which, you kind of grouped into that at this point, so you're going to be on the list. We're talking about the Clone Saga, Maximum Clonage, all of that garbage. And I know it's not just Amazing Spider-Man these writers worked on. It was also Web and Spectacular, and then I want to say the OG Spider-Man, but then you also have Scarlet Spider #1, and all of these other things that were involved with the Clone Saga. Every single bit of it was garbage. Okay, you have Peter Parker hitting his wife, you're killing his baby. All of a sudden, the Peter Parker you spent a couple decades reading wasn't Peter Parker. It was actually a clone, and Ben Reilly's the real one, but then you retcon all of that. It was literally the biggest waste of time in all of comic books up until we get to the most recent stuff. But literally, none of it made sense. You had to read 1,000 issues. It was the most stupid and incoherent storyline in all of comic books, I think. And for that reason, you guys are all going to be on that number 3 spot because you were all responsible for it. And if I missed any names, sorry. But look, these were the folks that were most responsible for it. And it sucked. I've literally had people tell me they quit collecting comic books because of maximum clonage. Okay. Number 2, and I think this is going to be a non-controversial pick, but it's Nick Spencer. Okay. His run on Amazing Spider-Man was horrible. Wasn't great. It could have been the editorial. Probably was the editorial. Started off really interesting because it made you feel like he wanted Mary Jane and Peter Parker to be back together. And the editorial probably stopped that. But it was just not good. Nothing about it was fun, interesting. Nothing at all. I mean, it took me an extra month and a half to read the rest of it to finish off Spider-Man because of how bad this run was. And I think it's universally kind of agreeable that this run was not great. The artwork, however, was fantastic. Otley, Humberto Ramos, and there were some other people. But Jesus, it was terrible. It was not good. Nothing about it was fantastic. I mean, the whole Kraven storyline, and then, what they're doing with Harry, or was supposed to be Harry, and turned out to be like his kid clones and all. Just look, terrible. Terrible, terrible, terrible. But not as terrible as the number 1 pick, which is another brain trust from Marvel. And the most recent run, Kelly Thompson, Saladin Ahmed, Cody Ziegler, Patrick Gleason, and Zeb Wells. Okay? This whole Beyond Corporation thing was terrible. You have some weird corporation led by this weird, awkward, pink-haired lady, and she's sending out cease and desist letters to Miles Morales to stop him from being Spider-Man because they own the IP for it. Like, how stupid is that? You really think Miles Morales gives a damn about or any hero for that matter, gives a damn about a cease and desist letter? We're talking about an actual superhero. And then you have Peter Parker laid up in the bed, and Ben Reilly, being Spider-Man again, and he's acting as this corporate shill. Like, the whole concept was dumb. And then your big thing was your new Goblin Queen, which is like the 19th derivative version of Green Goblin, almost as dumb as Menace. And then the most recent, like, weird laughing Hobgoblin was stupid. But really, the Goblin Queen, like, that's going to be your big thing. And now Chasm is coming out of that. So stupid. And I hope that if this is your only experience with Spider-Man, you really decide to go back and maybe look at the Roger Stern run or the JMS run or Jerry Conway or some of these other people, because that will give you a true appreciation for Spider-Man and what it ultimately should and is meant to be, not this weird, goofy stuff that they've given you the last couple of years, and honestly, I mean, probably the last decade and a half or so, probably even further. Let me know what you think about the top 5 best and top 5 worst. Do you agree? Am I out of my mind? You're the best part of Two Brothers Comics. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it out. And as always, collect your way.